Good evening y buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Good evening.
It's great to be here. First, I want to thank the Bobcats. Raise your hand if you're a Bobcat out there. All right. To thank all the Bobcats for being here and for inviting us. I want to thank Professor Pepón Osorio for this invitation and this opportunity, and also for Bob and for Tim for hosting us. It's been a real pleasure to spend the day here in Philadelphia. It's not often that I get a chance to do a program with my son, so this is really a special opportunity for me and for Joaquín, and so we're really happy to be part of this, and happy to be with you today as we're learning about the meltdown in Philadelphia. We had a chance to go to Fairhill and see for ourselves the devastation in the community that's created when the school's been shut down, and we'll talk further about that. The format we've agreed to is we're going to do as a dialogue. Joaquín will start posing some questions to me. I'll follow with some questions to him, and then we'll open it up to you to have a dialogue between all of us. So I should add, this is not my first time in Philadelphia. I've been here many times over the years. Way back in the 90s, came in when Dave Hornbeck was still superintendent. So I've watched a lot, seen a lot as things have developed here. And so I'm very familiar with the challenges facing the city, and we're happy to be part of this event in helping you to think about how do we respond to these setbacks that have affected this community so profoundly.
This is my third time to Philadelphia. I don't have as much experience in this space as my father, but every time I've come to Philadelphia has been because of education. The first time I came here with high school students that I was working with in one of the programs that was just mentioned. We came to visit UPenn. Then I had a cousin who was here. He actually went to UPenn and then Temple, and this is the third time. And I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to not just shadow, but to engage one of my first teachers, my father, on this topic here with you all today. So I wanted to start by asking you, Daddy, to help us to clarify the context of what it is that we're talking about. Because we went to Fairhill Elementary. We got to get a tour of the community. It was brief, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, but we got to take in the sights. We got to talk to a couple of people. We met a gentleman named Luis, who is at the site that was Fairhill Elementary, and he has recreated that space into a really nice garden and play area where people in the community can come and take advantage of the space. But it's kind of hard to ignore the crumbling buildings that are taking up, that make up that space. And it's no surprise at all to learn about the closure of so many schools in poor communities, mostly of color, and this is happening around the country. How are we supposed to understand this phenomena, these actions that are taking place around the country?
So that's a good starting point, and I don't know how many others have this flyer that's here, but we got a flyer put up about school closures. And it just reminds us that this is not a Philadelphia story, it's an American story. It's happening in every major American city right now. You've seen same kind of developments. School closures, which are rationalized by saying the school's failing, or that there's a budget crisis, or that there's low enrollment. In fact, the low enrollment was created because the schools were not serving kids well, and then that becomes the justification for shutting a school down, opening up charter schools, which in many ways aren't any better than the schools that they replaced. There's no kind of planning about where kids should go in proximity to where they live. So this is happening all over. Now, I generally don't believe in conspiracy theories, right? I think that, a lot of times even when it seems like a conspiracy, it's hard to imagine, well, who's doing the plotting? Where do they meet? Let's find them, let's expose them and stop it. So I'm not sure if there's a conspiracy to do this here in Philadelphia, but there clearly is a plan that's being carried out by your superintendent, who I know, Bill Haidt, by the SRC, that's appointed by the governor and by the mayor. This plan is in full effect. It is a plan of disinvestment in neighborhoods. If you think about it, even when they struggle, public schools are often the most stable institutions in our community. Right? They're stable historically because they had stable funding. The school we visited today, they said was built in the 1890s. How come suddenly now it can no longer survive? It's not because you lost children. You still have children over there, right? I've actually talked to someone, one of your public officials, about the numbers. The numbers of kids in Philadelphia have, if anything, grown because of population increase. So it's not as though there are no children here. What there's a lack of is a vision on how to serve this community and provide the educational opportunities that we know are so critical to the future of these young people. Lack of leadership, and I think a total blatant disregard of the community. Now, whether or not that's a conspiracy or not, it almost doesn't matter. It's what's happening. And the real question is, where is the accountability on the public officials? Right? Now, you elected a mayor, Kenny, and I know about him because I get all the emails. Probably some of you get those emails too, usually asking for money, but also telling about, his plan. So my hope is that with that kind of leadership, you'll start to see the tide turn. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the vision that the mayor has includes rebuilding the educational infrastructure of Philadelphia.
I'm not in support of having a conversation about conspiracy theories. I am also not going to ignore patterns, right? And so we know what things are by what they do. And if the impact of this kind of reform is to further disenfranchise communities of color and historically oppressed communities, then it would be silly for me not to be skeptical of the intentions. Right? The outcomes are showing themselves. But I think in this dilemma of what our schools are going to be like, and whether public education is something that everybody really is entitled to, because I think that is also part of the conversation. If I have to leave my community, if you've shut down all the schools in my community, and I have to leave to go to another community, there is a message that's being communicated there, right? And as those schools are closed, other schools are popping up, right? I've worked in charter schools. I've been a part of coaching and supporting teachers in charter schools. I've also been a part of the review of charter schools, and I know that there is a wide range. There are some that are doing excellent work. We know of many, and we know some that should not exist, right? And if those are popping up in the same spaces, and I'm thinking in terms of space, the space that these schools were in, where they're closed, some of the poorest communities in the country, in some of the biggest cities of the country. Schools are being closed. People have to leave to get this education. And other schools open up. Our charters, let's talk a little bit about charters.
Yeah.
How can we understand this charter movement? Los Angeles, where we both live, a city that is basically publicly announcing they plan to have charters take over almost half the schools. New York City, where we both lived, charters have grown at an incredible rate. Are charters a part of the problem? Are they a part of the solution? What's going on with charters? How can we understand this charter movement?
Yeah. So I think we have to make a distinction between why parents might choose a charter, right, versus the policies behind it, okay? Many parents are looking for better opportunities for their kids. And if they think their kid is going to get a better education at a charter school, they will do like any other parent will. They will put that child's name in the lottery. They will try to get the child in the best school that they think is available. So that's understandable, and one of the things that worries me is the way parents get pitted against each other in this battle. And you see that happening in many communities where parents end up fighting each other over the schools as a resource. This is where I think the policy issues, the political issues, have to be understood very carefully. Why? Because charters were originally intended to serve as alternative models for what was possible, right? So charters have fewer regulations, right? Which means they're able to hire people that they want to. They don't have to go through the same kind of regulations. They're able to, they're able to manage themselves with greater flexibility than public schools. Anybody who's worked in a public school knows the bureaucracy is difficult to get anything done. So the idea was that if you gave schools more freedom, they might be able to come up with more innovative models for educating kids. Well, the record shows that most of the charters are not particularly innovative. They're pretty ordinary, right? And in fact, many of them are not serving the most disadvantaged kids, right? I'm talking about kids with special needs, kids who don't speak English as the first language. What we're seeing across the country is those kids are underrepresented unless the charter was specifically created to serve those kids, right? And there are some charters like that, not many. So what's end up happening is that the growth of charter schools is creating an even more unequal system, where those who can get out, get their kids into charters, those who can't are left behind in public schools that have even fewer resources now, right? And are even worse off than they were before. I was told today there are between 150 and 180 teaching positions in Philadelphia right now that have not been filled. That means there are kids going to classrooms with no teacher every single day, right? Every single day. To me, that alone calls into question the leadership of the superintendent and the SRC, that they would allow that. That is unsafe and educationally unsound. How could you rationalize and accept that sort of a situation? So what bothers me about the charter situation is that we're not, if in fact charters were going to help public schools, then why aren't some of the advantages available to charters now available to public schools, right? That's not happened. But moreover, so little accountability on the charter schools with respect to how they use money, with respect to how they serve children, with respect to the rights of teachers, almost no accountability. And so this is a huge political problem, and it's not just a Philadelphia problem, it's a problem throughout the country with respect to the role that charter schools are playing now and the way in which they're contributing to this very chaotic and very unfair system of education that we see. The sad thing is, and I know, and anybody who's lived here for a long time in Philadelphia knows, there were public schools in our communities that once served kids very well, of diverse backgrounds, right? And that had labs and science and libraries and offered an education and sent people to college. Well, why can't they do that anymore? What happened? You know, there's, I'll give a New York example of it that I know well. DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. Over 6,000 kids once went there. It was integrated up until the 1970s. James Baldwin, the writer, went to DeWitt Clinton, as did many other dignitaries I could name. Today, the school is down to 2,000 kids. It's the last choice. It's the school you go to when nobody else will take you. It has a greater number of homeless kids than any school in New York City, greater number of kids who were recently incarcerated than any schools in New York City. It offers no science. None of the electives that it once offered are anymore. Who would choose that school? This is where I go back to the conspiracy. It seems to be almost a deliberate plot to destroy this huge community resource because it once did. Why is it no longer able to do things it once did? And there's so little in the way of accountability on the elected officials. New York City has a mayor like your mayor, Kenny, who has a progressive vision, but he's done nothing to reverse the situation in New York City, despite the promises. And so it's going to be very important in Philadelphia that the public stay engaged and insist that this reinvestment in our communities occur. I say this a lot of times. You know, we care more about sports teams than we do about children, right? Think about how much they love the Eagles here, right? They love those Eagles. They love those Flyers. They love even the 76ers, the losing 76ers. They love those. Why do I say that? Because they will put public dollars into those facilities and not put them into children. It says everything about the priorities.
I was having the same conversation with another teacher about preparation for teachers and the need to ensure that they understand the context of the work that they will be doing, right? And that basically, he responded to me saying I was harsh because I was saying that we don't need teachers who don't care, who don't love our kids in those schools, right? And I feel very strongly about that. We don't just need bodies in there. And there's not enough support for teachers as in the current environment, right? We don't prepare them enough, we don't provide the follow-up support, we don't even provide them enough resources for the schools to meet the needs of the communities. Clearly, and based on what you're saying, we're not talking conspiracy theory. Let's deal with what is actually happening. It's not working, right? And there is a clear need for some kind of intervention. I think it is the superintendent who is suggesting that community schools might be in the future.
Or the mayor too?
Mayor,
both
sorry,
are.
mayor. Community schools, pre-K, universal pre-K will be the area of focus. I'm struggling to see how that, as an area of focus moving forward, can remedy the conditions that we're living in right now. So maybe can you speak a little bit about the direction that's heading, and if there is to be an intervention, what might work? What could be some things that the community can do?
So, the idea of a community school is a great idea, right? I mean, you consider how many kids are coming to school with unmet health needs. We were at the exhibit today, and they have a water fountain, which the sign says, "Don't drink the water," right? Because it's probably contaminated. But right next to it in the exhibit is a picture of an inhaler, right? What percentage of kids in Philadelphia right now have respiratory conditions? Right? A lot, right? Very high. In schools that have no nurses, right? This is a health crisis waiting to blow up. So having a community school that might have an actual registered nurse on site, that might also be able to have a social worker or psychologist on site, that's a good thing. So I would never be critical of that idea. So my only questions would be, how is it going to be implemented? How are we going to make sure that it's sustainable, right? That it's not dependent on one-time monies, but something that can be sustained over time. And how do we make sure that in bringing in these services that we also support the teachers? Because I think right now, what we've been doing in this country is we've been blaming teachers for problems that teachers didn't create. Teachers don't create the budget. Teachers don't make these decisions. They work in our schools. And yeah, it's true, they're not all the best, but guess what? We're never gonna attract all the best under conditions that are so miserable, right? The conditions are driving out lots of talented people right now from our schools. If community schools help to, think about it right now, without community schools, in effect, teachers are social workers. Teachers are the nurse. They're filling in jobs they're not qualified to do, right? And they're overwhelmed. And so we need the community schools, but we also need a very clear plan and vision for how to create schools that will meet the needs of the kids. And again, Philadelphia has examples like that. It's not like we're making this stuff up. What's the science magnet school you have here? Which one? Not George Washington. What is it called? Yes, the Science Enrichment Academy. That's what I'm thinking of. Because I know that principal very well, and I've been to the school. My point, I hear they're going to replicate the model. The reason why I bring it up is because why does that school work? Well, because it's offering a high quality education. People want to be there. Well, why can't we do more like that? Why can't we, if we already know these are schools that serve kids well, that attract people in, why isn't that part of the plan and the vision for Philadelphia? And I would say that's the question we should be asking to the mayor and the superintendent. What's the vision for creating schools that are diverse, right, both racially and socioeconomically, because we know those schools work better? What's the vision for creating schools that actually prepare kids for college and careers? How are they going to do that? If they can't answer that, then they don't deserve to have the jobs.
You know, I think it is worthwhile to pressure the mayor, to pressure leadership, to question them, to push them to see what we're talking about. And there's other work that can be done right now, because we can't wait. We can't wait for someone to come do right by the communities that have continuously been, in some ways, abused, right? So what about right now? What about while they're figuring out their plans, they're still wavering on what to do, schools are being closed.
Right.
And we heard something like 3 closures in the next, each per year for how long? I'm not sure. But, you know, that kind of environment, that kind of a culture of closing these buildings, these places of learning that a community has, at least in the city I grew up in, I felt a sense of belonging there. I felt a sense of entitlement. As a young boy of color who didn't have much that I could say was mine, that was my school.
Right.
And when you close that repeatedly, and you close that in this community, right, it breeds, as there was a conversation we had today, and I asked, how do people perceive this? How is this experience? How do we feel? And what I was told by students was, we feel like we don't matter, right? That's clearly being conveyed. Right. We can't wait.
No.
So what should we be doing? We have
Right.
a body of people, a group of people here who are concerned. I believe are concerned about these issues and feel that they're invested in some way in these issues. And I'm not sure if the mayor or the superintendent's in the room, but we are. So what about what we can do?
So I think you have to have a 2-track strategy. On the one hand, you've got to be engaged politically, right? So that you can elect the right people, and then after you elect them, hold them accountable. You've got to do that, otherwise you're going to just lose the whole thing, right? But you can't just wait until you elect the person who's going to do the job. Now, we saw when we visited Fairhill today, the back of the school, Joaquín mentioned already, this man, Luis, has created a garden, a play area for the children. He's got chickens. I mean, it's amazing. Barbecue area. He's done it himself. I'm sure he's gotten some help, but what the point is that he didn't wait and just look at the empty lot and say, what a shame, right? He said, no, we got to take this lot and make it viable and useful for the community again. That's the model. I'll give you an example, share a story. I was in South Africa, in the townships outside of Port Elizabeth. And in South Africa, you're talking about poverty. They have much, much higher rates of poverty than we have, because no work for most of the people, a very high number of kids who are orphans because their parents have died from AIDS, right? This man, a friend of mine, is sent to the school in this township to become the principal. He gets to the school, and the school is just a school in name only. No kids are showing up, no teachers are showing up. The school's in shambles, windows broken, pipes have been stolen, the pipes that deliver water to the school, because people are selling the metal, right? And this is the school he's been told, you're gonna be the principal of. So he's trying to think, what am I gonna do? So he starts by holding a party in the community that he calls a Thanksgiving party. Right? And they don't have our Thanksgiving, it's his own version of Thanksgiving. And they say, what are you thanking us for? He says, I'm thanking the community for the help it's going to provide. Right? I'm thanking you in advance, because I can't do this by myself. So people come out, they eat the food, and they say, okay, good idea, we'll help you. He said, the first thing we got to do is put a stop to the vandalism at the school. He said, well, we know who's been ripping off the school. He said, I'd like to meet them. So he sits down, he meets with young men who've been robbing the school. He says, we need to put a stop to it. And they explain their circumstances. They're unemployed, they're broke. He says, I'll make a deal with you. You provide security at my school, and you can have free housing on site. So now the guys who used to rip off the school are security. They don't get paid. but they have free housing there. He goes to some of the parents, almost all mothers. He said, we have to do something about getting kids back into school. Parents say, well, the kids are hungry. He said, look at all the land we have. Why don't we have a garden here? He said, oh, we hadn't thought of that. They create a garden. Now the kids are being fed at the school. No one's getting paid. He's got over 80 parents a day volunteering at the school. They run a clinic. I said, what happened? I said, are they trained? He said, no, they're not trained. I said, what happens when the kids get sick? He said, oh, we give them some water and rub their head. Half the time it works, right? He said, when it doesn't work, we have to call for help, right? 80 parents a day. What was once a school that didn't function is now a beacon of hope in the community. They didn't wait for the Ministry of Education to save them. They took the action themselves. I kept asking the parents, what makes you volunteer if you don't get paid? They said, I wasn't doing anything anyway. I was just at home. And my kids are here. I said, now I'm part of something that's helping my community. See, I think that, the reason why I share that is because I think that so often we have this sense of hopelessness and helplessness that comes from a lack of imagination about what is possible even now, what we could do even now amidst the resources. I'll share one other South African story, and we both went there. Robben Island. Robben Island was the maximum security prison created by the apartheid government to destroy the ANC. When I was given my tour there, you know what they told me? Former inmates who now are tour guides, they said the ANC called Robben Island their university. Okay. They took a prison, maximum security prison, when Nelson Mandela was held 7 years in solitary confinement, 21 years altogether, and turned it into a university. I said, how does a prison become a university? They said, we found ways to share information clandestinely. We got guards, right, to sneak in books to us, right? They used it to prepare the leadership that now run the country. Well, not run well, but that's another story. But my point is, if you could turn a prison into a university, what could we do with our schools? If we got more people involved, said we're going to be mentors, we're going to be tutors, we're going to work with these teachers, we're going to create gardens in our schools, we're going to turn this back into a genuine community resource. We've got to tap into that energy that's there, that desire that's there. It's in our community still. And I think that that's what's missing too often. We're waiting for the right person to get elected to save us, and it's not going to happen.
I think those are important examples. And this is not South Africa. And we don't have enough teachers in our schools. And I don't mean to rain on this. I'm not trying to rain on the hope at all. I think hope is we have to have hope, and we can't just be cynical about the situation. And the situation is dire, undeniably. So I think it's also different in a community where the schools have already been closed, and in school communities where we expect those schools to be closed, right? It's a different kind of relationship with this culture of closure. What about for the communities that still have their schools? For communities that maybe, especially with this kind of well-known fact of 3 schools per year being closed, moving forward, what can the schools that are still open, what can those communities do? What can we do to preserve our space if we can, if that's even possible? Or how can we advocate, if it's possible to advocate? What are some strategies that might be useful for creating some kind of buffer, some kind of intervention, some kind of guard? Because what you described requires a lot of cohesion, right? It requires us to know what skills and knowledge is in our community. How do we best utilize? And when communities aren't organized, that's very difficult. So what are some starting places? Where do we go from here?
You know, you're right. It does take organization. It takes vision. And it takes creativity. And you know, the young people that are here today, I would say we need to engage them in this too. Because I think part of the problem is that if we only think about my child and my child's education, then we're going to lose this. If we approach this as individuals, then we might get lucky enough to get Jacob into a good school, or to get Angelisa in a good school, but what about these? You know, what's going to happen to them? And if because my kid is in a good school, then I'm no longer concerned, then we're not seeing the big picture. What we need to convince, and I'm glad to see a diverse audience tonight, but we need to convince the broader community that it's everybody's interest to have a strong public school system, whether they have kids in it or not. Your public school system is the best way to improve your economy. It's the best way to keep people out of prison. It's the best way to address crime, right? Because when people are educated and employed, communities do better than when there's high rates of unemployment and lots of people idle, right? So, you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, but I can point to examples in the United States too. I gave South Africa. I gave that as an example because it's such a devastating situation there. I can take you to Bedford-Stuyvesant, PS 28, school where they have volunteers in every single classroom. Again, parents don't get paid. What do they have? Why do parents do that in some schools, not in others? Because the principal at that one school I'm mentioning in Bedford-Stuyvesant has the vision and builds trust. Trust with parents. So the parents feel welcome. The parents feel as though they have something to contribute, so they extend themselves. It sounds minor, but it's not. You know?
No, it's not minor at all, right? You talked a little bit about why, the reason these schools are being closed. They're being closed because they're being deemed failing schools, right? Chris Rock made a joke about a lot of times parents come back to school, it's like returning to the scene of a crime, right? They've had bad experiences there, and they expect to have their children to have similar experiences. These are the schools that end up being closed. So what you're describing is a paradigm shift for many educators.
And for many parents.
And many parents, and stakeholders in general. Different kind of relationship between the school and the community. There's a big gap between what you're describing and what is happening in a lot of the schools.
But when you find yourself with your back against the wall, then you got to start looking for some other ways to go. Your back is against the wall here in Philadelphia. Right? I mean, it's hard to imagine it getting much worse, except we just heard it will. They have a plan to keep closing 3 schools a year. That's their plan. For, I don't know, until they've shut the whole thing down, right? So that's where they're going with it. The question is, are you going to let that happen, or are you going to say, no, these are public schools, the public gets to decide, right, what the future's going to be, not a few appointed people. It is political, but it's political in the sense that how engaged we are will determine our future, right? It's very interesting when you look at this chart they gave us. 88% of the schools have been closed in Chicago are in the Black community. Only 10% the Latino community. Why? Is it because Rahm Emanuel likes Latinos more than African Americans? No. It's because the Latino community is better organized in Chicago. And so he will go after where the least resistance is. They already shut down all the public housing projects in the South Side, so he's easily able to go after them because people are demoralized, right? It is when people believe that they have a chance to fight for something that it's going to make it much harder. And you've got to love your kids enough to say, you know what, we can't just allow this to happen to our community. We can't just allow these schools to be lost to us right while under our watch. And I think that you have a good reason to fight here in Philadelphia, and a lot at stake. A lot at stake. You know, and again, you're not the only ones. It's happening in New York. It's happening in Los Angeles. It's happening in every major city across the country right now. But in some communities, this Friday, the teachers are going to go out on strike in Chicago. Right? They're saying they're going to stand, and they're organizing parents to stand with them. You know, I believe that the majority actually doesn't want this kind of a plan to go through. Right? I don't believe the average person in Philadelphia wants to see its public schools destroyed. But I think there's got to be leadership to organize people to resist the plan that's in place that allows it to happen. So should I ask you one? Because, you know, we've been talking, in my family, we've been having this debate about politics. And he's been feeling the burn, right, over here. And, you know, it's not that, there's a lot about Bernie Sanders that I admire. I admire his candor, his authenticity. But I am suspicious of the promises and the ability to deliver, right? I mean, I wish he could, you know, deliver. So explain this generational split, right? Because I'm seeing it in a lot of places where the younger generations, die-hard Bernie, really believing that this could do the trick. I think some of the older folks, I'll put myself in that camp, say, if they get, you know, look at how many times the Congress has tried to get rid of health care under Obama. I mean, it's so hard. You got 20 million people covered right now under Obamacare. Would they really take health insurance away from 20 million people? Yes, they would, you know? If they could win this election, they will find a way to do it. So I don't see us in the midst of a political revolution that Bernie's talking about. I see us in the midst of trying to not allow Trump to be elected. So I want to understand the sentiment of the youth, and since you're the youthful representative up here today, help us shed some light on this.
Unfortunately, I think I'm going to end up restating some things you've taught me.
Okay.
One being that we got to move out of love, not fear. And as you said, we can't talk about conspiracy theories, but we can actually look at the outcomes. The outcomes are clear. What is happening is not working. You still have faith, right? We can talk about the problems of education here. You can give a Hillary answer, I can give you a Bernie answer. You can talk about intentions not being clear, and I can say, but outcomes are, right? And so if we keep on focusing on this idea that those leaders who are not being explicitly clear about the problem, how can we have faith that they can really have the right answers moving forward? I appreciate the honesty of Bernie Sanders. I'm also not I'm not a Democrat. That's not how I identify. But I identify with his message. I identify with the message. I think part of his message is also that there is no easy answer, that it takes hard work, that it actually takes people doing the hard work of participating in the conversation, right? And in education, we know that participating in the conversation is the hard work that actually leads to progress. If we're not talking, but that's part of why I thought that this was a great idea. Engage people in the conversation about what's happening with them, to them. Don't have it in isolation. Have these discussions more. Make sure that young people are having these conversations. When we talk about a political revolution, that's the only thing I can imagine. More people being involved. That's the only way anything could work. I think I saw an article or a blog or something like that today. I'm probably messing it up, but it said something like, the Bernie Sanders revolution brought to you by the futureless people of today, or something like that, right? There's no confusion, I think, amongst the youth. Global warming, education, our food, the water, everything is being hijacked. It feels as though it is in some way not serving the earth and the people on this earth, living things on this earth the ways that they should. And it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to, but there's a culture, there's a political culture that supports it, that enables it. And you know, the idea that we can't make drastic change is just historically untrue. So I think that's part of the divide. I think that we perceive the complacency of our elders as complacency only because And that's respectfully an urge to recognize the crisis that is here right now and the urgency of the problems that we're facing right now. That we don't really have time to make this gradual change with regard to things like this education system, like climate change, like all of the examples that I just mentioned. That we do need a clearer vision that is much more progressive than what's being put on the table. I think that's part of it. I don't know.
So, I mean, I understand, but I would challenge you about the way you think about change. I think that change is always gradual. There's never been a time where it just happens that all of a sudden things just change.
I wonder how long it took Luis to make that garden.
It took time.
Relatively, pretty quick.
But I'll give you an example. South Africa, which I brought up. Okay, so after apartheid fell, Nelson Mandela elected president. Wow, how more dramatic. You go from prison to president. People thought, wow, South Africa is going to really change. Well, you go back there, and you would think apartheid never ended, right? Most black people still live in the same shanties they were living in before. So much crime, so much corruption. Now, it doesn't mean there's been no change, right? I heard Bishop Desmond Tutu says, thousands more people now have running water, thousands more children in school, thousands more people in homes. So there's been change, but it's not the kind of home run change that some of us would have liked to have seen.
And many people, when I went to South Africa, said that that was because of the more, the soft stepping approach that leaders took once they gained control. Because the change was drastic. Ending apartheid, bringing in formerly incarcerated leaders into the presidency, into the cabinet, that is significant change. And yet there was not a seizing of property and wealth, right? Redistribution. So, I was born in Grenada. You know that, right?
I took you there.
You went to Grenada because Grenada was having a revolution at that time. Drastic change at the time. Main focus being education. Maybe you can tell us a little about what was accomplished in the short amount of time that they had a political revolution in Grenada. What actually happened?
So so in 1982, when he was born, I decided I was going to go to this little tiny island in the Caribbean that had had a revolution. I wanted to see firsthand the changes occurring in the country. And what I saw was not drastic change. What I saw was very slow, incremental change, right? And that's because you can only change as fast as the people are willing to change, right? Doesn't matter if you change the government if the people are not there with you. So I was focused on adult education in Grenada, trying to understand, well, how do ordinary people who work the land every day, people who've never participated, how are they suddenly participating in this country? And what I saw was a lot of people, on the one hand, were embracing the idea of democracy and voting and being involved. On the other hand, they were still stuck in the past in terms of their own experiences, their worldview. Grenada is a very religious country. People go to, and I'm not against religion, but a lot of times religion breeds a very passive mindset. You say, I'll get change in the afterlife, not in this life. And that's what I saw a lot in the country. So, my own experience, life experience has taught me that you've got to have clear ideals about what's possible, but you also have to have a plan for how to get there. And so my challenge with Bernie, right, when, Bernie says, I want free public education and higher education. I say, oh yeah, we need that. How are you gonna get that? How are we gonna pay for it? So I don't say you have to answer for Bernie, but I just say that as I think about the politics and the times we're in, I get a little concerned about, because with age, I think I want the plan. I want to see the plan. That I'm not just gonna vote based on the rhetoric, right? I think about the mayor who got elected here. I was following all his messages. He sounded like if he got elected, this would be a new city. Well, I wonder how much of a change is going to be put in place. I don't want to be critical because I know it takes time, but I think we've got to be pragmatic about it.
But there's a difference between the experience of being in Grenada and feeling like the change was gradual, and the vision, which was a drastically different reality. And so while it might have been experienced as something that was gradual and maybe not much, what were the outcomes, Daddy?
And the outcomes were also still gradual.
For Grenada?
Yeah.
Why was literacy the main focus?
Literacy is the main focus, but it wasn't even like Cuba or Nicaragua. They had a very low percentage of people illiterate in Grenada compared to a lot of other places.
Well, where'd they end up, though?
They ended up very well. So I don't want to take away from what they accomplished in 4.5 years. I just want to say that when we look around the world and we look for examples of change, think about the Occupy movement here. Not that long ago, people were really hopeful about what would happen. Think about the Arab Spring. People were very hopeful what would happen in those places. And it hasn't turned out the way we hoped.
So I don't want to, well, I would say there's a term that I came across. I think it was Teresa Gay Johnson, something like, I forget exactly her name, but a constellation of struggle. And recognizing the commonality, recognized game is the street language we might use. But a constellation of struggle, or longue durée, right? This being a part of the same kind of struggle. And I would say most of the occupiers are behind Bernie right now, right? They recognize this is the same struggle. They haven't just disappeared. I would say that it's very much related to this conversation about education and public education. Are we going to continue to provide a public education for every child? That is, we know that education is the main factor in social mobility. It is the main factor that in the reproduction of social status. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is. And so what, how we need this. We need education. There's not much else that poor people can rely on to improve their status. Right?
And that's the reason why I work in education, and that's the reason why I do still have a lot of hope, because when I work in schools around the country, I'll give you this example. I was in Muncie, Indiana, small town, 60,000 people. Ball State University is there. They have a teacher education program. It's every student in the program is white, everyone. But they get it that they've got to prepare them to work in the schools where most of the kids are not. So they have a teacher education program that requires their student teachers to be mentored by an adult in the community, right? And they spend almost a year working in that community, working with kids, working with families, working in after-school programs. And I talked to the young people from the university about it. I said, what was hard about this? They said, the hardest thing is going to be leaving. Said the ties we formed with this community are so deep, so profound, it's transformed our whole way of thinking about our work as teachers. I left there very hopeful about what's possible. So I bring it up as an example because I think that, if we can be practical, I mean, what struck me about Luis today, the garden in the back of Fairhill, was how practical it was. He said, these kids need a garden. They need a place to play. We have this empty lot. Let's take it. And he's there doing it. He's literally transforming the space through his actions. He's not waiting for the mayor to give him permission or the superintendent. He's we're going to do this. And fortunately, no one stopped him and thwarted him. Imagine if it wasn't just him, if he had a whole posse of people working with him, what we could do. So that's what my challenge is, to be idealistic, but also to be realistic, and let our realism guide our day-to-day actions, not to make us passive. Because one of the things that concerns me about the young people here, I grew up at a time when we believed change was around the corner, right? And some people of my generation became disillusioned when it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I still believe change is possible, but I believe it's going to take a lot of work to make it happen.
I would say that many of them are still disillusioned, and that's part of the reason that they would support such a pragmatic approach. And I would never say we shouldn't be making practical decisions, right? That's important. Yes, Luis built that garden. How sustainable is it right now? How can he do it by himself? How long will he be able to do it by himself? There has to be a more transformative goal than the practical decisions. And so again, back to Bernie, it's not just we can work out the plan. He hasn't really had much of a chance to explain the plan. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Bernie either, but in terms of education, I think we do need to have that transformative vision very clear and make the practical decisions now, take those actions now. When we talk about community schools, I think of a friend and colleague of yours and mine who started Roses in Concrete Community School in Oakland, California.
I'd encourage you to take a look. Roses in Concrete. It's a new school just developed in Oakland. It's a charter school, actually, but with a vision of serving the community.
Very different kind of vision. Very different kind of vision in that teachers will be using that as a place of learning also, right? So it's to support the transformation of the quality of teaching in the district, throughout the district. There's a community accountability model where teachers who serve in that school, the processes that they use to make decisions include student and parent stakeholders weighing in on those decisions. The community's needs drive the decision making. That is transformative.
Sure. Well,
for some places in communities, I'm sure here in Philadelphia as well as other major cities, that seems radical. That seems out of reach.
And so we need schools like that in every one of these cities across the country right now. Because people need to see something tangible that lets them know it's possible. It's not just words.
The founder had left this country and saw another school and was inspired and had developed a vision that he got his whole team to buy into that helped clarify that vision for him. And now they're making it happen.
Yeah.
So again, I think practical, yes, we have to eat today. And we have to be shooting for the stars. We can't settle for what we're getting right now.
On that note, why don't we open it up, see if there's some questions out there from the audience. Yes.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much for your observations back and forth. Two things I'd like you to talk about. One, you've mentioned just with the imminent possible strike in Chicago, what role do you think unions, teacher unions, can have in this? Because there's a perception that charter schools have become abundant in our community so as to really break the unions that have been concerned about issues that have to do with teachers, but also kids. The other one is, what do you think would be the most persuasive strategy in trying to influence Bill Haidt and the School Reform Commission about the needs of our city to stop this march towards 3 closings every year? Those two things.
You mind if I respond
Sure.
a little bit to the first part?
Yep.
Thank you.
I've taught in a charter school. I've taught in an ununionized charter school. It's not fun. Most teachers would agree with that. It's in the interest for teachers to be organized and work together and be able to advocate for themselves. And unions must get better at identifying the challenges that their people are facing, the challenges in their communities, and address them straight off and not have those things be used against them. When unions can do that, they'll be in a much better position. Because if they are perceived to be defending the status quo, then we have a serious problem, right? And they kind of undermine themselves. So I would just put that out there first. We've got to know ourselves in order to serve, right? But I think the other
Yeah,
parts,
to me, it's interesting because both the NEA and the AFT endorsed Hillary Clinton immediately, as soon as she announced her candidacy. And my challenge to them was, what are you getting from her? Right? What is Hillary's position, her policy on education? They don't even know. So to me, at the national level, there's a problem. In Chicago, what's interesting is the local union has very much defined their interest in alignment with the interest of the families they serve. And so when they went on strike a couple years ago, families supported them. I hope they've done the same work this time so that they don't lose the support of they need those parents. The parents have to believe that what's good for teachers will be good for kids too. That's what has to be articulated. And so I think unions are a critical vehicle for challenging the kind of power that we're seeing in the country both at the local but also at the state and national level as well. Because, you know, it's big money interests that are driving the agenda in most policy. With respect to how do we persuade the people like the superintendent, Bill Hite, who I know, who I believe to be a decent person, but I don't know. See, the problem, I don't know who else is talking to the superintendent, right? And how do ordinary parents and teachers make arguments that will weigh in if he also is listening to big funders and developers who are also telling him this is what we want here. So that's a big unknown for me. I would like to think that if we make a case rooted in evidence for what we should do, that he would embrace it, that he would support it. I would like to think that. But I've been around long enough to know that it's not, I do research. I try to tell other researchers, policy's not based on research. Policy's based on ideology and on money and what's politically expedient. That's what influences policy. But, maybe it's not a reason to not do research. I was talking to one of your city council members earlier who was very upset that Philadelphia has so many universities. Where are the universities in this conversation about the future of public education here in the city? Why are they not weighing in and saying what's in the interest of the public, right? They need to be accountable too. So.
I don't need this, I'm a professor, so I talk loud anyway. Number one, I remember in City Schools and American Dreams, you said that you were a pragmatic optimist.
I still am.
And I'm very much in agreement with that. But I do disagree that it's not a conspiracy theory because I am a product of Philadelphia public school system, as is my colleague. And we actually graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, which is an Ivy League institution and probably the top institution in the city. I'm currently pursuing a doctorate at Temple in urban ed, thanks to Dr. Noguera. But I want to say that when I was growing up, there were college prep programs in every school in the community. Now they've taken those programs out. Part of a requirement, because I also work in admissions, in University of Pennsylvania is that in order to get in, you have to have 4 years of science with a laboratory. The average, the majority of our schools don't have science labs. Right then and there, they can't even go to the top university in the city. Therefore, it's like there is a snowball effect because it doesn't have, we cannot meet the requirements for a college education. So I do believe that the university should partner with the schools, but as you said before, it's a matter of funding and money talks, and the communities have to make the universities talk to the schools. Because as an educator, if it doesn't go from the grassroots to the universities as what we call from the town to the gown, it's not going to work. So this is why vision is so important. I'll give you an example. I was asked to work here a few years ago after the racial violence occurred at South Philly High School. Some of you will remember what happened there. And Arlene Ackerman, who was superintendent at the time, asked me to come and help figure out what was going on and figure out what they should do. Philadelphia at that time was spending thousands of dollars to staff that school with police officers. You work there now. Police all over the place. Police. Meanwhile, no counselors, no lab science. What is the vision? What are you giving to the children? You're turning it into a prison. That's not attractive. Who's attracted to that? Right. Now, it's not attractive to anybody. Now, of course, schools have to be safe, but what makes a school safe is kids who are engaged academically, kids who are thinking about college. That's what makes it safe, not the presence of lots of armed security guards. So the lack of vision
is, I think, also creating these schools that are not serving our kids well. And that's, so again, going back to the conversation with the superintendent, what's your vision? What's your vision for creating schools that people will choose to go to? And if he can't answer that question, he doesn't deserve to be superintendent.
And the vision has to be a transformative one. Practical decisions will be made to get there, but you know what? Bringing police in seems practical to a lot of people.
Right. I mean, and I'm not saying you may not need security, but at the level they have it, while ignoring the educational needs, it's such a reversal of priorities.
Well, what I'm saying is that the vision, like you were saying, is not transformative, and that's why that was sufficient.
So it's Pepón Osorio. I have a question, which comes back again to the notion of the class issue around public education. And I agree with Joaquín when you're saying that there is perception and reality. And the perception is that we have a public education system, but reality is that it's only for the poor, right?
Exactly.
Which doesn't really, it limits the publicness of it. And so my question is, how do you engage, which is what struck me the most when I finished the installation with the Bobcats, how do you engage the middle class into a conversation about the poor, right? Because the middle class, the majority of the people that went to the exhibition have kids in private schools. And to them, it was a surprise of how public schools work. And to the people that are in the poor communities and completely disadvantaged communities have no understanding of the system whatsoever. So how do you reconcile with that? How do you engage the other in an opportunity that makes the public really public?
So again, that goes back to vision. What would, middle class people always have choice, right? Because if they don't like what's being offered, they're gonna go someplace else. They'll go private, they'll move if need be, right? So the question then is, what would attract people with choices, middle class people, to choose to put their kids in our public schools? So about 4 years ago, I went to a public school not far from here that was like that. It's in a gentrifying neighborhood here in Philadelphia, but it was serving affluent white parents, middle class Black and Latino parents, same school. One of the parents asked me to come to visit the school and talk to the staff, because with their challenges, how do we serve everyone well, right? But they get it, that in order for that school to work, the quality of what they provide has to be high. Otherwise, people with choices will leave. Well, that's what I mean about vision. What's gonna attract people to come to our schools? And if you don't have a vision that's compelling, you're not going to do it. And it can't just be about safety. It's gotta be about the quality of the learning that's taking place there. And when the quality is high, you're more likely to get buy-in from all sectors of the community, not just the poor.
Hello? I'm going to go back because it's a little intimidating sitting in front of all these people. I'm going to stand over here. My name's Thomas. I'm an assistant principal. Well, I serve the assistant principal role here in Philadelphia. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Temple University. I'm also here with my wife. I'm sure she appreciates that I singled her out. My question to you, and it's interesting because we're merging our department secretly at Temple. My question for you is, with all the neoliberalism, with everything that's, changed, the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, the testing, and the vision of what is currently charter schools as they exist right now in Philadelphia. It seems that the creativity of children is stifled, and all the research out there points to a decline in achievement, a decline in emotional intelligence, a decline in grit because the children are not stimulated. And it was very inspiring to hear your talk at Boston College where you talked about the boat in the classroom. And I think that, as an administrator, working with teachers, we do have a lot of turnaround with teachers because of the working conditions. It's very difficult to balance the accountability for these, the testing that takes place, and what we really need in terms of education. So I guess my question to you is, how do you expect administrators to balance that when we know that the research says that creativity promotes learning and growth and social emotional development, and the decline of the decline of achievement is due to an increase in testing? Okay, so I wanted to ask to discuss that, and also I wanted to talk to the community schools real quick, because I'm very interested in seeing that develop and come to fruition. I do believe that charter has a role in, for example, I would maybe want my daughter to attend a bilingual program fully, but what I see in the school district is the conversation is not that I want my child to go to a project-based learning school such as SLA with TED. I want, a safe school for my child. And I think that becomes the dynamic. So we end up at my school serving students that are not really interested in the specialized academic program we have. It's a safe option. And I think that's where the community school kind of is a great chance for the needs of the communities to be met. So that's another follow-up.
Respond?
I would say the safety is fragile if they don't focus on learning, right? Because the needs of the community come to the school. And so if safety is the main focus and people come to that school because they think it's safe, then now they're here, and now we have to go beyond safety, right? So I also served in a very similar role as a school leader. Part of what I've learned and part of what I try to work with school leaders these days to do is to recognize their role as support for teachers. Not just accountability. You can't bring accountability without providing support and the follow-up support that goes beyond that. We can't do a drive-by PD and expect suddenly teachers to be able to implement the strategies that are best practices, right, with our students who need something different than what they've been getting, right? Because teachers are adults too. They need the support, the ongoing coaching and mentoring to be effective. And as long as we keep focusing on trying to raise the test scores, we're gonna fail. The point is we have to be responsive to the needs of the students. We have to get them excited about what they're learning. And if we're not doing that, and if we're not working on developing strategies to do that better, we're missing the point. We got to recognize, what is the point of a school? Why does this school exist in this community? What should it be doing? It can't just be about safety, right? So that's my quick answer. But
yeah, I mean, I would say something similar, and it goes to the first question. We've used accountability in such a punitive way on schools that we got everybody afraid that if they don't raise the test scores, they're going to lose their jobs. And fear is not a great motivator for creating and transforming schools. What we've seen happen instead is cheating, right? Go on, and Philadelphia's had some of that. We've seen the curriculum reduced so that anything that's not on the test, we're taking away from kids. Art, music, taken away, not on the test. And what we've got to do instead, if the superintendent doesn't have the vision for how to create schools that offer enhanced learning opportunities for kids, then we need principals that do, right? Principals that say, our job is to get the kids excited about learning. Our job is to get kids doing science, singing and doing music. We got to find ways to engage them in learning, because it's so much easier to serve kids who care about learning than kids that we're forcing. And so again, I can name schools where that's happening. It's happening not because of policy, it's happening in spite of policy. And that's what I would say the challenge particularly for the site leaders, is to do that at their schools, to inspire their teachers, right? And say, your job is to get these kids excited about learning. Your job is to create classrooms where kids want to be there. That's our job. And I believe when you do that, guess what happens? Your test scores do go up because kids are engaged and kids are actually learning.
And I would add that you can't do that effectively in isolation, right? We can't suddenly create these bubbles of safety in communities that we ignore, right? Because in effect, we're teaching students that their goal should be to get out of those communities, when in fact we need them to recognize that they can transform their communities. And we can be doing that with them.
I think this has given us a lot of things to think about, and I think it's been a very, very inspiring conversation. So let's give Pedro and Joaquín a big round of applause. Thank you all very much for coming. There's some refreshments over here, so take your time. Thank you.
Thank you.